The rain wasn't just falling. It was attacking the world. It hammered on the roof of the farmhouse like 1,000 tiny drums, and the wind screamed around the corners. 10-year-old Maya stood at the kitchen window, her breath making a small fog on the glass. Her dad was in the living room, his face lit by the blue light of the weather report. He was a practical man, her father, who believed in fixing fences and waiting out storms. But Maya felt a pull, a nervous twitch in her stomach that had nothing to do with the thunder. It was a feeling, deep down, that something was wrong out there in the drowning dark. She slipped away from the window, pulled on her big yellow raincoat and her muddy boots, and took the heavy flashlight from the hook by the door. She didn't really think about why. She just moved, quiet as a shadow. The back door creaked when she opened it, and the storm rushed in. A wet, roaring animal. She heard her dad call her name, but his voice was eaten by the wind. She plunged into the night. The beam of her flashlight was a shaky little boat in a sea of black. It cut through the slanted lines of rain, showing the familiar path to the old barn, turning into a river of mud. The feeling in her stomach got tighter, a knot of dread. She wasn't going to the barn. She turned instead towards the wild edge of their property, where their land met a thick wall of woods. That's where she heard it. Not with her ears, but with her bones. It was a sound so weak, so swallowed by the storm, that it was more like a feeling of pain. A low, shuddering whine. She swept the flashlight beam across the snarled bushes and the dripping weeds. And then she saw him. At first, she thought it was a pile of wet gray rags. Then the rags moved. 2 eyes caught the light, not with a wild glare, but with a look of pure, tired terror. It was a dog. No, it was the biggest dog she had ever seen, bigger than any dog on any TV show. He was all long legs and thick, matted fur, the color of a storm cloud. One of those legs was trapped, caught in the rusty jaws of an old metal trap half buried in the mud. He didn't growl when he saw her. He just stopped moving, his sides heaving, watching her. He was terrified, but in his amber eyes, Maya didn't see madness. She saw a tired, trapped creature, just waiting for the hurt to end. "Hey," she whispered, the word vanishing in the rain. "Hey, it's okay." She took a slow step forward. The giant animal flinched, a small movement that made the trap clink. Maya's heart thumped hard against her ribs. She knew she should be scared, but all she felt was a huge, swelling need to make it stop, to fix this wrong thing. She didn't think. She just acted. She shuffled forward, her boots sinking in the mud, until she was right beside him. The smell of wet fur and earth and metal filled her nose. Slowly, she shrugged off her big yellow raincoat. The rain instantly soaked her sweater, making her shiver. She didn't care. Gently, talking in a soft, steady stream of nonsense words, she draped the coat over the animal's trembling back and head, shielding his face from the stinging rain. Under the yellow tent of her coat, the world seemed to get quieter. The animal's shaking slowed, just a little. He was watching her. She could feel it. Just then, a beam of light, brighter than hers, found them. "Maya, what in the world?" Her dad's voice cut off. He stood there, his own raincoat flapping, his face a mask of shock and fear. "Dad, help him." "Please," Maya cried, her voice breaking. She didn't take her hands off the coat, off the creature beneath it. Her father, David, was a cautious man. He saw the size of the animal, the wolf-like slope of its back, the power in its frame, even while it was hurt. This was no lost Labrador. This could be trouble. This could be danger. He opened his mouth to tell her to get back, to come inside, to leave this to nature. But then he looked at his daughter. He saw her, soaked to the skin, her small hands holding the coat over this wild thing, her face not scared, but fierce with a determination he rarely saw. She wasn't asking. She was telling him what was right. With a grunt that was half sigh, half surrender, David waded into the mud. Don't move, Maya. Just keep talking to him. Nice and easy. He worked the rusty mechanism with strong, careful hands. The metal was cold and sharp. The animal tensed, a low rumble vibrating through him and up into Maya's hands. She kept whispering, "It's okay. It's okay. You're okay." Her words a gentle thread holding the moment together. With a final grating squeak, the trap sprang open. The leg was free. For a long second, nothing happened. The giant creature just lay there in the mud under the yellow raincoat, as if he couldn't believe it. Then he moved. He shifted, groaning, and slowly, unsteadily, pushed himself up. He stood, towering over Maya, even as he favored his injured leg. Water streamed from his fur. He looked at David, and David took a careful step back, putting himself between the animal and his daughter. The animal didn't look at David again. He turned his great head. He looked down at Maya, who was still crouched in the mud, small and shivering without her coat. He lowered his muzzle. He didn't lick her. He simply nudged her cold hand with his cold, wet nose. It was a touch of pure, simple gratitude, and in that moment, under the pounding rain, a bond was sealed. Not between a man and a dog, but between a lonely little girl and a lost giant soul. David saw it happen. He let out a long breath. "All right," he said, his voice rough. "All right. Let's get him to the barn." The barn, once just a place for tools and old hay, became a sanctuary. Her father cleaned the wound on the giant creature's leg, his hands surprisingly gentle despite the worry on his face. He made a bed from fresh straw and an old horse blanket. The animal, who Maya had already named Ghost in her head, watched every move with those quiet amber eyes, but he never bared his teeth. He seemed to understand they were trying to help. The first few days were a delicate dance. Ghost would eat only if Maya was the one to put the bowl down, and only after she stepped away. He drank water in long, careful laps, always keeping an eye on the door. He was silent. He never barked. The only sounds he made were the soft rustle of straw and the slow, steady rhythm of his breathing. Her father, David, tried to be the voice of reason. "We need to put up posters," he'd say, over breakfast. "Someone must be missing a dog this size." But Maya would just look down at her cereal, her heart squeezing tight. He wasn't lost, Dad. He was alone. She knew it was true. Ghost carried the smell of pine and open air, not of another home. Slowly, Ghost began to change. The haunted look in his eyes started to fade, replaced by a calm watchfulness. But this watchfulness had a single, unwavering focus. Maya. When she came home from school, he would be waiting at the edge of the barn, though he never came closer to the house. When she sat in the straw to do her homework, he would lie beside her, his big head on his paws, as if her multiplication tables were the most interesting story. He was not a dog who played fetch or learned tricks. Their bond was different, quieter. Maya would talk to him about her day, about the kids at school who didn't understand her quiet ways, about how she missed her mom in a fuzzy, aching way she couldn't quite put into words. Ghost would listen, his ears twitching, and sometimes he would lean his heavy warmth against her side. It felt like he understood the words she wasn't even saying. It was her father who noticed the things that didn't add up. He was a man who knew animals. He'd grown up on this land. "Did you hear that last night?" he asked one morning, pouring coffee. "That sound?" Maya shook her head. She slept deeply, feeling safe knowing Ghost was in the barn. "It was a howl," her father said, his voice low, but not like a dog howling at a siren. This was different. Longer, sadder. It came from the barn. Maya just smiled. He was probably singing to the moon. Then There was the way Ghost moved. When he finally started walking on his healed leg, he didn't trot. He loped. A smooth, ground-eating stride that seemed to use no energy at all, like he could run forever. And the way he investigated things, a new smell, a fallen branch, was with a slow, deliberate curiosity, his nose working overtime, his whole body tense and ready. One afternoon, David saw it firsthand. A groundhog had wandered into the yard. Their old dog, who had passed away years before, would have barked and chased it in a noisy, happy circle. Ghost did not make a sound. He went perfectly still. Then, in a movement so fast it was just a gray blur, he was across the yard. He didn't catch the groundhog. He stopped just short, as if he'd only wanted to see if he could. The groundhog scrambled away, and Ghost turned and walked back to Maya's side as if nothing had happened. That night, David looked up videos on his computer. Videos of wolves. He saw the same loping run, the same intense focus, the same silent, efficient movements. A cold knot formed in his stomach. The rumors started in town. The postman mentioned seeing a wolf-like thing out by the old farm. A neighbor claimed their chickens were acting skittish. The worry in David's eyes grew heavier. A shadow he couldn't shake. The final push came from a man in a uniform, a wildlife officer, friendly but firm. He'd heard the reports and came by just to check. He stood at a safe distance from the barn, peering at Ghost, who stood protectively in front of Maya. "That's no ordinary dog, sir," the officer said, his voice kind but serious. "Looks like a high-content wolf dog to me. They've got wild instincts. It's not just about size. It's about what's in here." He tapped his temple. It might be fine 99 days out of 100, but that 100th day, with a child around, you just don't know. After the officer left, the silence in the kitchen was thick and heavy. Maya had tears in her eyes. "He wouldn't ever hurt me. You know he wouldn't." Her father looked older than she'd ever seen him. He believed her. He had seen the love between them. But he was a father first. He couldn't ignore the what if. "We have to know for sure, honey," he said, his voice rough. "If he's mostly dog, certain breeds, we can maybe make this work. We can get the right permits, build a stronger fence. But we need proof. We need to know what he is." The solution was a small, innocent-looking kit he ordered online, a canine DNA test. It promised to unravel Ghost's history with a simple cheek swab. The day it arrived felt like a betrayal. Maya held the little swab, her hand trembling. Ghost, sensing her distress, sat perfectly still for her, just as he had the night in the storm. She rubbed the swab gently inside his cheek. He licked her hand once, a warm, trusting gesture that made her want to throw the test in the trash. They mailed it off. Now, there was nothing to do but wait. The waiting was a dark cloud over the farm. Every time Ghost played too rough, or let out a low growl at a strange noise, David would tense. Maya would hug Ghost a little tighter, whispering promises into his fur. Ghost felt the change, too. He became her shadow even more, a silent, protective presence that seemed to sense the danger wasn't in the woods anymore. It was coming in the mail, in a printed report that held the power to break their world apart. The happy bubble of their secret barn life was gone, replaced by a tense hope, fragile as a spider's web, holding everything together. The waiting was the hardest part. The world outside kept turning. School buses came and went. Leaves changed color and fell. But inside Maya and her father's home, everything felt stuck. Stuck on a single question. What was Ghost? Maya tried to act normal. She'd do her homework at the kitchen table, but her eyes would drift to the window, looking for the gray shape in the barn doorway. She'd talk to Ghost more than ever, her words tumbling out in a quiet stream as she brushed his thick coat. "It doesn't matter what the paper says. she'd tell him, her fingers working through a tangle. "You're my ghost. That's all that matters." He'd lean into her touch. His eyes closed, but his ears would be swiveling, always listening, as if he too was waiting for a threat he couldn't see. Her father, David, threw himself into work. He fixed fences that didn't need fixing. He organized the tool shed twice. It was easier to focus on concrete tasks than on the scary, fuzzy future. Every evening, he'd check his email with a kind of grim routine, clicking refresh on the inbox, his shoulders slumping a little when there was nothing. The DNA company had said 4 to 6 weeks. It felt like a lifetime. Ghost's behavior shifted in small, subtle ways. He became less like a pet and more like a sentry. He started patrolling the edge of the property at dusk, walking a slow, deliberate line between the barn and the tree line. He didn't bark at deer or raccoons anymore. He'd just stand and watch, a statue in the fading light, until they moved on. It was like he was guarding his territory. Guarding them. One chilly afternoon, a delivery truck came up the long driveway, one they didn't recognize. Ghost was at Maya's side in the yard in an instant. He didn't growl or snarl. He simply placed his large body squarely between Maya and the truck, standing rigid and tall, his gaze fixed on the driver. The friendly wave from the deliverman faltered. He left the package on the porch and drove away a little quicker than he'd arrived. David had watched it from the window, a cold feeling in his chest. It wasn't the behavior of a dog protecting his home. It was more calculated, more serious. "Did you see that?" he asked Maya later, trying to keep his voice casual. "Ghost sure is watchful. He's keeping me safe," Maya said simply, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. And maybe it was the email arrived on a Tuesday night, long after Maya had gone to bed. David was in his chair by the cold fireplace, scrolling through the news on his phone without really seeing it. A notification popped up at the top of the screen. "Your canine heritage report is ready." His heart did a strange, heavy thump. He put the phone down for a second, just staring at it. This little device held the answer. It could tell him he had to call the authorities, that the magnificent animal his daughter loved was too wild, too dangerous to keep. It could break her heart. With a dry mouth, he opened the email and clicked the link. A PDF loaded slowly. He scanned past the company logo, the welcome message, looking for the summary. Primary breed identification, Sarlu's Wolfdog. David blinked. He'd done his research. He knew that name. A Sarlu's was a recognized breed created by mixing German shepherds with Eurasian wolves decades ago. They were legal, though rare. They were known to be shy, loyal to one person, and sensitive. A flicker of relief, warm and bright, shot through him. This was good. This was a breed. They could work with this. He scrolled down, reading the details about the breed's traits. Then he reached the section titled Secondary Heritage and Rare Markers. The report stated that alongside the dominant Sarlu's lineage, there was a significant, unmistakable genetic signature linked to an ancient and geographically isolated breed, the Carpathian Shepherd Dog. David stopped breathing. The words seemed to pulse on the screen. Carpathian Shepherd. He knew that name. Not from a dog website, but from a place deep in his past, a place filled with love and loss. His wife, Maya's mother, had come from a small village nestled in the Carpathian Mountains. She'd told stories of the huge, shaggy guardian dogs that watched over the sheep flocks there, dogs so fearless they stood against bears and wolves. She'd called them the souls of the mountains. A coincidence? It had to be a wild, unbelievable coincidence. He stood up, the phone forgotten in his hand, and walked to the hallway closet. On the top shelf, pushed to the back, were a couple of old cardboard boxes. He hadn't opened them in years. The pain of losing his wife had been too sharp, and then the busy work of raising a baby girl alone had taken over. He pulled them down, dust floating in the lamplight. The first box held baby clothes, tiny dresses that smelled faintly of lavender. The second was heavier. Inside were photo albums and a bundle of letters tied with a faded ribbon. His hands trembled as he untied it. He found a photograph near the top. It was a little faded, the color soft. It showed his wife as a young woman, not much older than Maya was now, standing in front of a rustic wooden house with snow-capped mountains behind her. And beside her, sitting tall and proud, was a massive, shaggy dog with a thick gray coat and intelligent, dark eyes. The resemblance to Ghost was staggering. It wasn't exact. Ghost was leaner, his eyes amber, but the essence, the proud bearing, the thick mane of fur. It was like looking at a close relative. With the photo shaking in his hand, he picked up one of the letters. It was in his wife's flowing handwriting, written to him before they were married. He skimmed the sweet, familiar words until a passage jumped out at him. Asterisk. And my brother writes that our beloved Lupa. You remember I told you about our guardian dog? She had a final litter of pups. 6 little warriors. He says one of the males has the exact same look in his eyes as old Lupa did. He's calling him Spirit for now. I wish you could see them. There is something so ancient and good in these dogs. Asterisk. David slumped back against the wall, the letter and the photograph resting on his knees. The DNA test hadn't just identified a breed. It had sent a message. It had connected a thread that stretched across an ocean and through years of grief. Ghost wasn't just a random, stray, or even just a rare Sarloo's Wolfdog. He carried the blood of the dogs from his wife's homeland. The coincidence was too vast, too specific. This wasn't chance. This felt like a puzzle piece, one he never knew was missing, snapping into place with a sound he could almost hear. He looked from the photo of his young wife and her guardian dog to the dark window, beyond which Ghost slept in the barn, guarding their daughter. The cold fear he'd felt for weeks was gone, washed away by a wave of awe and a dawning, almost frightening understanding. The question was no longer, what is he? The question, David realized with a shiver, was now, why is he here? The silence in the living room felt heavy and thick, like the air before a storm. David sat on the floor, the photograph in one hand, the letter in the other, surrounded by pieces of a past he'd carefully packed away. The cold knot of worry about Ghost had vanished, but a new feeling had taken its place, a deep, swirling confusion that was part wonder, part shock. He couldn't go to bed. Sleep was impossible. Instead, he made a cup of tea and sat at the old kitchen table, the papers spread out under the warm glow of the overhead light. He read the letter again. And again. Asterisk. Our beloved Lupa. A final litter? One of the males. Calling him Spirit? Asterisk. Ghost. Spirit. The names echoed in his mind. He dug deeper into the box. There were more letters from his wife's family, written in careful English. He found a few official-looking documents. And then, tucked inside a small notebook, he found a folded piece of paper that wasn't a letter. It was a printout, the ink slightly faded. At the top, it read, Carpathian Guardian Preservation Initiative, Canine Lineage Record. It was a family tree, but for dogs. He saw Lupa's name and lines connecting her to parents with strong, rugged names. And there, noted beside Lupa's last litter, was a single line with a notation. Male, designated Spirit, microchip #CZP77471. Transferred to U.S. for family placement. April 15th. David's breath caught. The date was just a few months after his wife had passed away. His mind raced, trying to put the jagged pieces together. His wife had loved those dogs. She'd sometimes talked, with a sad smile, about wanting Maya to know that part of her heritage, to have a guardian like the ones from her childhood stories. But they'd never gotten a dog. Life had been too busy, then too sad. What if she had arranged it? What if, before her illness got bad, she had asked her family to send one of Lupa's pups? A living piece of home for the daughter she wouldn't get to see grow up. But then, why hadn't they received him? Why had Ghost ended up alone in the woods? A sickening thought hit him. He remembered that spring. It had been a blur of grief and legal papers in trying to be strong for a toddler. He'd ignored a lot of mail, letting it pile up. He'd missed calls from unknown numbers, too tired to talk to anyone. What if someone had tried to deliver a scared, confused puppy? What if there had been a mix-up with an address or a delivery at a bad time, and the little creature had gotten loose, lost in a country that was nothing like his mountain home? Ghost hadn't been astray. He had been on a journey that went terribly wrong. The next morning, Maya knew something was different the moment she came downstairs. Her father wasn't just sitting with his coffee. He was at the table, the old boxes around him, his eyes red but bright. "Dad, what's all this?" He looked up at her, and his smile was sad and full of something she couldn't name. "Come here, honey. I need to show you something." He told her everything. He showed her the picture of her mother as a young woman with a big, shaggy dog. He read her parts of the letters. He explained, as simply as he could, about the DNA and the Carpathian dogs. Maya listened, her eyes getting wider and wider, one hand absent-mindedly petting Ghost's head where he sat pressed against her leg. "So, he's from where Mom was from?" Maya asked, her voice a whisper. "I think so," David said. "I think he was meant to be a gift. For you, from her." Maya didn't cry. She looked down at Ghost, who gazed back at her with his calm amber eyes. She threw her arms around his thick neck and buried her face in his fur. "You were coming to find me," she whispered into his coat. "All along, you were trying to find me." That afternoon, with Maya's eager help, David did something he hadn't done in years. He found an old email address for his wife's older brother. He wrote a careful, nervous email. He explained who he was, mentioned his late wife's name, and asked, very simply, if the family had ever owned a dog named Lupa, and if there had ever been talk of sending a puppy to America. He didn't mention Ghost. He was almost afraid to. The reply came 2 days later. It was early morning there, late at night for David. The ping of the notification made him jump. The email was long. The English was formal, a little stilted, but the emotion poured through the screen. His brother-in-law wrote about their shared grief, about how sorry he was. They had lost touch. And then he confirmed everything. Yes, Lupa was their heart dog. She had a final litter. The strongest male pup was to be a gift, a guardian for little Maya, a piece of her mother's spirit in animal form. They had arranged everything. The pup, named Da, which meant spirit, was flown to the United States. A courier was supposed to drive him the final distance to the farm. But there was a terrible accident on the highway, a multi-car pileup in a storm. In the chaos, the van carrying the animals was damaged. A door burst open. Several animals, terrified, fled into the wooded area near the highway. Their little Da was one of them. They had searched. They hired people. They put up posters for months. But they found nothing. Heartbroken and filled with guilt, they finally assumed the little pup, bred for mountains, could not have survived alone in the American wilderness. They were too ashamed to call and deliver the news of their failure. The silence, they wrote, was not from lack of love, but from too much sorrow. David read the email 3 times. Then he walked outside. The sky was just starting to lighten, streaks of pink and orange over the barn. Ghost stood by the fence, watching the sunrise. David walked over and stood beside him. For the first time, he didn't feel a flicker of caution. He felt awe. He looked at the animal, the strong line of his back, the intelligent tilt of his head. This wasn't a pet that had gotten lost. This was a creature who had survived against all odds. He had crossed highways, found food, escaped dangers, and lived wild for years. And still, somehow, some deep-bred instinct or a memory in his blood had drawn him to this specific piece of land, to the daughter of the woman who had loved his ancestors. Ghost turned and looked at David. He didn't nudge or lick. He just looked. And in that look, David saw an understanding that went beyond dog and man. It was the look of a soldier who had finally completed a long, impossible mission. David reached out a slow hand and placed it on Ghost's broad shoulder. The fur was coarse and thick. "You made it," he said, his voice cracking. "You finally made it home." From the porch, Maya watched them, her heart so full she thought it might burst. She now knew the whole story. Her mother, in a way she could never have imagined, had kept her promise. She had sent a guardian, and after a long and lonely journey, her guardian had finally found his way to her, not as a helpless puppy, but as a loyal, magnificent friend who had chosen her in a storm. The mystery was solved, but the real story, Maya realized, was just beginning. The truth didn't change the farm, not in any way you could see. The sun still rose over the same fields. The old barn still creaked in the wind. But for the people inside the little farmhouse, everything felt different. The air itself seemed lighter, easier to breathe. The fear was gone. David no longer watched Ghost with a nervous knot in his stomach, wondering if a wild instinct would surface. Now, when he saw the big animal lying by Maya's feet as she read, he saw what he truly was, a guardian. A living, breathing piece of a promise made long ago. He printed out the DNA results and the emails from Maya's uncle, putting them in a folder. It was their proof, not just for any official who might ask, but for themselves. A story they needed to remember was real. Ghost changed too. It was as if the secret he'd been carrying had been a weight, and now it was lifted. He became less of a shadow and more of a companion. He still patrolled the edges of the property at dusk, but now his walk seemed more like a proud owner, checking his land, not a soldier on a tense watch. He started to come closer to the house, often lying on the porch in a patch of sunlight, while Maya and her father ate dinner inside with the screen door open. One Saturday, David brought home two things: a strong, handsome leather collar and a custom-made name tag. The tag didn't just have a phone number. On one side it read, GHOST. On the other, DUH Carpathian Guardian. Maya fastened the collar around his thick neck. Ghost sat perfectly still, then shook his head, making the tags jingle. He seemed to like the sound. Maya laughed, a clear, happy sound that filled the yard. "Now you're official," she told him, scratching behind his ears. David started joining them on their walks through the woods. At first, Ghost would walk between them, his head swiveling from the girl to the man. Slowly, he began to understand that David was part of his duty too. One afternoon, David tripped on a hidden root and stumbled. In an instant, Ghost was there, not barking, but pushing his solid shoulder against David's side, steadying him until he found his balance. David looked down into those intelligent amber eyes and saw no pet-like affection, but a solemn responsibility. "You are hers, so I will look after you too." The connection to Maya's mother's family, once a thread broken by grief and distance, began to knit itself back together. They started having video calls on the computer. Maya's uncle, with a kind face and a thick accent, would smile and wave. He spoke slowly so they could understand. He showed them pictures of the mountains, of the old farm, and of a new puppy from Lupa's grandpuppy. But none have the soul of our Da, he would say, his eyes misty. To survive such a journey, to find his way, he has the old spirit in him. Seeing her family, hearing the stories of the mountains and the dogs, gave Maya a new sense of peace. She had always missed her mother in a quiet, aching way. Now she felt like she had a bridge to her. Ghost was that bridge. When she hugged him, she felt connected to a love that had traveled across oceans and through time, just to reach her dot as the seasons turned. Life settled into a new and beautiful rhythm. Ghost slept in the barn still, but on stormy nights, or when the wind howled a certain way, David would open the back door and whistle softly. Ghost would pad inside, lie down on the rug by the fireplace, and sleep there, his presence a deep, calm comfort in the house. One evening in late autumn, Maya sat on that rug with her back against Ghost's warm side, a book in her lap. A fire crackled in the hearth. Her father was in his chair, mending a work glove. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that isn't empty, but full of contentment. Maya put her book down and looked at Ghost's face, his eyes closed, his breaths even. She thought about the scared, trapped giant in the storm. She thought about the lonely creature who had watched her from the barn. She thought about the journey he must have had, all the cold nights and lonely roads, guided by nothing but a deep, ancient instinct he couldn't even understand. "Dad," she said softly. "Yeah, honey? Do you think he remembers? From when he was a puppy? Do you think he knew he was looking for me?" David put his mending down. He looked at the big dog and his daughter, curled up together. He didn't have the answer, but he had a better one. "I don't know if he remembers a plane or a van," he said slowly, "but I think something in him always knew what he was looking for. A child to protect, a family to belong to. He didn't find us by accident, Maya. He found us because this is exactly where he was supposed to be." Ghost opened one eye, as if he knew they were talking about him. He lifted his great head and turned to look at Maya. He didn't wag his tail or lick her face. He just looked, his gaze deep and steady. Then, with a sigh that seemed to carry the relief of a long journey ended, he rested his heavy head back in her lap and closed his eyes. In that simple moment, everything was complete. The little girl who had braved a storm to save a life. The father who had learned to trust a love he didn't understand. And the giant wolf dog who, after years of struggle and survival, had finally reached his destination. He wasn't a ghost of the past anymore. He was a solid, warm, breathing part of their present. He was home. And so were they.